So my name is Keith Wilson Jr. I'm originally from Lake Bluff, Illinois. Moved down to Kentucky for college in 2015, where I met my now wife, and I've been here ever since. I'm currently the associate worship leader or worship associate at Emmanuel Baptist Church, and I've been singing for as long as I can remember. My mom has a funny story she always loves to tell, that when I was real little, she was bringing me home from daycare and she thought I was asleep in the back because I had been so quiet. And this song comes on by Lenny Kravitz, Fly Away, and there's that part in the chorus where it goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the only part that I knew. And so that song comes on the radio and that part comes up and I just shout, scream it as loud as I could. Yeah. My mom about crashed the car because she thought that something happened to me in the back. And then she tried to start singing along with me. And I looked at her and I said, no, I'm singing. Music has been kind of my thing for a long time. I also did sports growing up and now do disc golf, somewhat technically, professionally, but I'm by no means, making a ton of money off that. I'm kind of just competing locally, just for fun mostly. I enjoy the thrill of competition. But yeah, I sing. I play a bunch of different instruments. I play acoustic guitar, a little bit of electric. I play bass. Self-taught piano. I for sure don't play with the correct technique, but I can get by. And then I play about enough drums to get us through a rehearsal, but I'd never put myself on for a Sunday morning.
There we go. And that's Keith Wilson, everyone. We can end right there.
Yeah.
No, so you're the worship associate at IBC up here in Lexington. So let's back up. So you started singing when you were a kid, and you shared that story about your mom. What did that kind of look like the rest of your childhood, through middle school and high school, going into college?
Yeah. So I sang all throughout school. Started choir as early as they allowed it. My first ever actual solo was in our church choir. My church did the classic old school Christmas play, and it was a musical. I can't remember the name of it, but it was Christmas Where, When, and Why. Don't know how I remember that, but there was one song that had a solo in it, and they gave it to me, and I remember that was my first ever solo, and also first ever major blunder on stage. I got through verse 1, chorus just fine, and verse 2 came up, and I just forgot the words. This was long before the confidence monitor became standard issue, and so it was all just from memory, and I'd never messed it up. But being under the lights and seeing everyone out there, I just kind of froze up, and I looked down and our director was kind of sitting down in the front, and she mouthed the next words, and I just picked it right back up and kept going, and I'm kicking myself for it. I'm down on myself the whole time, and then we get out there and not a single person comes up to me and says that I messed up or mentions it. In fact, what they did mention was how impressed they were that I messed up, and then just kept going like it never happened. And so I think kind of seeing that response was what kept me in it, because it could have been very easy for me to have that traumatic experience where the first ever solo I messed it up, and I could have just quit and said, you know what, I'll still sing in choir and I still like music, but the front man solo stuff just isn't for me. But I took that experience and just kind of ran with it, and I did choir all throughout middle school. I also did band. I played euphonium, and then I played trombone and jazz band.
Euphonium?
Yeah. So euphonium, I always have to explain it. It's the more common name for it is baritone. Technically, they're two different instruments, but they're very similar. but it's like a smaller tuba,
Yeah.
so low brass section. And then, yeah, 7th and 8th grade, played trombone in our jazz band. By the time I got to high school, they had plenty of trombones and needed more euphonium players. So all throughout high school, I played euphonium, still did choir. I also did theater. I did all 4 of our musicals throughout high school. My sophomore year, I actually got like a supporting, like the male lead. We did Legally Blonde, and I got cast as Emmett. And then, continued to do theater. I did a couple of plays in the wintertime. I directed a student one act. And yeah, I did music all throughout high school. I also, I was involved in church pretty much for as long as I can remember. My parents always took me to church, and I got involved right around middle school, high school, playing bass for our youth band. Didn't really do much on Sunday mornings, but got to play with the youth on Wednesday nights, and always really enjoyed that. Yeah. But yeah, and then in college, I actually went to the University of Kentucky to study music education. My high school choir director was like a huge influence in my life and a big role model, and I wanted to be that for someone else. I thought that my calling was to be a high school choir director, and that's what I wanted to do for the longest time. And because I knew that pretty early on in high school, I kind of had checked out of everything else, and school was not my thing. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like doing homework, but I could do well enough on tests to get by. And I kind of just told myself, get, as good a grades as you can kind of manage and still get into college. And so that's what I did. And I got into UK and even got a scholarship off of my audition. And then very quickly into college realized that just because I'm learning about music and the things that I'm passionate about doesn't mean that I all of a sudden can just like flip a switch and be a better student. And so I found myself kind of falling behind very quickly because I was still in my ways of not, doing all my homework and not spending my time studying and committing these music theory things and music history, all that stuff to memory. Yeah. I was more kind of just learning it so that I could pass the test. And freshman year, I was okay. Didn't do great, but was still able to keep my scholarship, was still able to pass all my classes. And then by the time I got to my sophomore year, music theory, everything compounds upon itself. In order to get to theory 2, you have to know and understand the basics of theory 1 like the back of your hand, and I didn't. And so my sophomore year, I really started to struggle and started falling behind, and narrowly made it through sophomore year. Had to drop a few classes. A couple classes I just failed and was going to have to retake. And junior year, that first semester, I just got so overwhelmed. And at this point now, I'm also living off campus, and I'm trying to work a job so that I can pay rent and do all that stuff, and also be in school. And also being in the School of Music, you're in choirs, and so I was in our main choir, men's choir, and I also did the Acousticats, and that's a lot of time that doesn't count towards like credit hours with rehearsals and concerts and trips and stuff. And I fell behind almost immediately my junior year. Ended up dropping enough classes to where I had lost my scholarship, and I was now part-time. Because I didn't have enough credit hours. And I got halfway through my junior year, and at this point I knew that my now wife and I, we were dating at the time. I knew that we were going to get married and that I wanted to propose, but I also knew that her dad was very strict on, not strict on money, but he worked really hard to live the life that he has now. He's a retired dentist. He had several practices, and he came from Eastern Kentucky, didn't have a whole lot, and worked really hard to get what he has. And so he made it very very well known to me that I needed to be able to provide for his daughter if I was going to get his blessing. And so I decided to step away from school and try and find a more full-time job and save up some money, not just for a ring, but to also be able to provide once we did get married. And so I stepped away from school. I never actually ended up going back. That's kind of my journey through with music through, middle school, high school.
Yeah. So how did you get to be a worship associate at Emmanuel Baptist? What did that kind of transition look like?
Yeah. So actually my first time at Emmanuel was my freshman year. A friend of mine invited me to their Easter service, and I didn't have a car on campus my freshman year, so I kind of just went to church where I could get a ride, which 9 times out of 10 meant I was going to Southland 608 service. And I wasn't really connected with that church. I was heavily involved with CSF, but that's more of a Christian organization, whereas Southland and IBC, those are churches. Those are, even after I leave college, that's where I would end up. But I wasn't really connected to Southland. I kind of just went there on Sundays because that's where I could get a ride. But that Easter, most of my friends were out of town, and the few friends I did have, one of them invited me to their Easter service at Emmanuel, and I was just blown away because they had not just a contemporary worship band, but they also had a choir and an orchestra. And me coming from a musical background and being in the School of Music at the time was just, I'd never been to a church like that. My church growing up was very much just contemporary worship, just regular band. We never really had choir or anything like that. And so I never really experienced that. And it was really cool. And it made a huge impression on me. And afterwards, when all my friends came back into town, I did still end up going to Southland. But that summer after my freshman year, I started working as a camp counselor for LCA, and it was at the IBC campus. And so I was there, every single day. And I ran into the guy who was the worship associate. His name's Christian Novicki. And I'd met him a couple times. Emmanuel used to send bands over to CSF. They used to kind of like rotate church bands at CSF. And so I'd met him before, and he had seen me lead worship for a campus worship night at the Seton Center. Yep. And so he knew who I was, I knew who he was, but we didn't really know each other. And one day I'm, taking these kids to the bathroom, and I'm waiting out in the hall, and he walks by and we strike up a conversation. And he mentioned that he had seen me lead worship and had great things to say about me. And he was like, I don't know if you're plugged into a church anywhere or if you're leading anywhere, but we'd love to have you audition for our team. And I, at the time I wasn't involved anywhere. And so I jumped at that opportunity and I auditioned, and that year got to start singing on the team. And then as soon as Bo found out I played bass, I played pretty much strictly bass for better part of a year, but was still, eager to get involved. I started attending IBC a lot more regularly. And then in about 2016-17, they acquired their second campus at Armstrong Mill, and they didn't have a worship leader over there yet. And so they were kind of just sending volunteers to lead a band. And I led over there a couple times, and I just saw that need, and I reached out to Bo, and I was like, hey, I really enjoy leading worship. I don't know if I'm called to be a worship leader, but I would love to help out as much as I can. And I don't know if you all do internships or anything like that, but I was like, if you need someone that's consistently over there, I'd love to help out. And so I started kind of interning over there, and it was more of I would just show up and lead rehearsal and lead on Sundays. It wasn't like I was full-time or anything at the church. It was more kind of contract work. And then when they hired Jared over there full-time, I still stayed over there and helped him out as much as I could and led with him and learned a lot from him. And he was probably one of the bigger influences in my career as a worship leader. I learned a lot of what I do from him, and continued to kind of lead with him, under him at the Armstrong Mill campus for about 2 years. And at the time, I had switched from working at LCA to I was working at Chase Bank, and it was fine. I had benefits, I had stable income, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. There was plenty of room to move up, and I had looked into it, but I wasn't passionate about it. And I don't know when it was, but somewhere in that 2 years of being at Armstrong Mill and working at the bank, I realized that I felt a strong call to be a worship leader, and that's what God wanted for me. And so I just kept asking questions about what would a position look like, how would that open up, and eventually Jared got to the point where he started stepping into different ministry roles aside from worship, and he had to step away from leading the student ministry worship. And so Bradley Thomas, our executive pastor at the time, and our student pastor Jake Deschler, they approached me and they were like, "Hey, Jared's stepping away, and you're our first pick for who we would love to come and lead students." And so I did that for the spring semester of 2020. So that, right during COVID, whenever we were able to come back, I started, or I guess it was 2020, started doing that. And then in September of 2021, I kind of pushed in, and I was just very upfront with them. I was like, "Listen, I know that you guys value me here, and I really love being here, and I just feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know if there's anything open or available, but I just want to put that out there that if there is a job that I can do, I would love to be on staff at this church." And so they were like, "Okay, thanks for letting us know. We'll kind of chat and we'll let you know." And a couple weeks later, they hit me up and said that they had one other person that was kind of in a similar boat, that they were interested in working in ministry, but there wasn't necessarily a spot to fill at the time. And so they decided to do this residency program where me and this other person, Emily Kitts is her name, she led worship, but she was more into kind of missions and college ministry and stuff like that. But the two of us did this residency where we met with a pastor who kind of led us through a couple books on theology and leadership development. And meanwhile, we were working part-time at the church, and it was kind of like you dip your toes in working in ministry to see, is this really what you want to do, or are you more of a high-capacity volunteer? And about 4 or 5 months in, right around, so I started that in September of 21, and in January, Jared and the Armstrong Mill campus had hired a full-time campus pastor over there, which meant that he was, instead of being the worship associate and kind of working both campuses, he was going to be just full-time Armstrong Mill. And they approached me and said that they would love for me to fill in that spot full-time at Tate's Creek. And so I jumped at that opportunity, and I've been there ever since.
Sweet, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. So as you've kind of gone through that, what have been some obviously getting the job and starting the job and God opening doors for you has been a big highlight. What's been some things where you've been kind of maybe some frustrations that you've navigated through, even up till now, just as a worship pastor?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is before even getting the job, that period of time where I knew that this was my calling, and that I also felt that God was calling me specifically to this church. I wasn't interested in going to Southland or any of these other churches and saying, "Hey, I would love to be a worship leader here." I didn't really have the desire to do that anywhere else. I felt a strong call that I needed to be at IBC. And it's a very weird spot to be in, where you have that clear as day calling from God, and then there's just no opportunity. And I just had to kind of walk through that and just trust in the Lord and His timing. And obviously I look at where I am now, and like that period of time waiting was so worth it that I could have easily just given up and decided to just full on like embrace, like I'm going to work in finance now. I'm a banker, and or I could have gone to another church and said, hey, I'm willing to go wherever. But I kind of had to sit in that, and it was hard. It was really hard, and I felt that, from what I'd learned from Jared, when I first started at Armstrong Mill, I was not very, I was still new at playing guitar. I didn't learn guitar until I went to college, and so I pretty much only knew the basics, and I knew how to use a capo, and that was about it. I wasn't a strong guitarist. I didn't know a lot of the tech. I didn't know much about planning a service, and I learned a lot from Jared, and so I felt like I had all those tools and I was ready, but there was just no doors being open. And so that was one of my biggest frustrations. And then frustrations of being in ministry is, for one thing, there's not really a set schedule. Obviously I'm working 40 hours a week, and Fridays and Saturdays are my weekend, but if I had $1 for every time that I had to come in and work on a Friday and Saturday, I mean, it's not that simple to just say, I'm not coming in, I'm not doing anything Friday, Saturday, because Sunday's coming. It's a very interesting position that we're in, where the start of our work week is the biggest week. It's the day that we're working the whole week up to, and then we have our weekend, and then all the work we did previously is the first day of work. Yeah. And so that's a very interesting spot to be in. So that's another frustration. And then obviously, it is working in ministry. We're all for the same goal of leading people to Christ and sharing the gospel, but we're still people. We're not perfect. Yep. We all have our own opinions and ideals and thoughts about how things should be done, and that can be very difficult. And we have a pretty large age gap on our staff too. We've got people up in their 60s, and then we've got myself, I'm 28, and we've got other people that are just straight out of college, and everywhere in between. And a lot of us younger people see kind of where the church is going, and a little bit more contemporary, but still with hints of kind of blending that traditional style to reach all generations. And then you've got some people that are like, no, this church is 119 years old, and we've done it the same way every single Sunday, and we're not changing it now. And so any kind of change in the church is going to be an uphill battle, not just with your congregants, but also with the staff. And that's something that I've kind of had to learn to kind of walk through and deal with. And then another frustration right now for me is I feel similar to how I was before getting this job, that like I feel God's call right now to our college ministry, our young adult ministry, and like this next generation. And I also feel that I have built up my repertoire and my resume to be the guy, and I'm not. And yeah. I know that Bo, my worship pastor, he's not going anywhere anytime soon, and I don't want to jump him. I don't think that's ever really going to happen, but I feel like I'm ready to kind of walk into that spot where I am like the lead worship pastor. And I've had conversations with my head pastor Ron of what maybe looking at, instead of me being a worship associate and being directly under him, maybe we kind of restructure my position to where Bo and I are equals. We don't really know what that looks like. And then in terms of our college ministry and young adult ministry, like I'm helping out as much as I can there, but still having to learn to say no when I've got a full plate of stuff that I already have to do. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, Sundays are our priority. And if pulling me into student ministry and college ministry to do worship nights or lead for whatever, this, that, and the other, if that's going to take away from the work that I can do for Sunday when we're actually reaching the most people, then I'm going to have to pick that every time. But
Yeah.
I do, feel that call to our college students and young adults, and I feel that in the last few months, like whenever Passion rolls around, we always send a group to Passion, and as long as I've been on staff, I've gotten a chance to go. And most years, it's kind of I'm just going with the college students. I'm not really in charge of anybody, but they're sending me so that I can hear the new songs, think of any that would be good for our church, looking at their production and lighting, looking at how they structure services and stuff like that. It's more honestly a learning conference for me than it is time to go and bond with our college students. But this past year, instead of us all chartering a bus or driving down separate, we rented vans, and I got to be one of the van drivers. And that put me in a situation where I kind of had to have conversations with college students, and I got to know a lot of them a lot closer. And I feel that my influence in that age range has just grown immensely. It's one thing when people tell you, like, hey, you've got a lot of influence over our young people in this church. But to see that influence and to see the way that people respond to you and how they want to listen to you has been a whole new thing that I've had to kind of step into and navigate that. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's great, man. So that I totally understand. I think a lot of people have been in a similar spot, maybe not directly like correlated to like worship ministry, but kind of in like a waiting space of like, what is that? What is the next thing? Because like we're human, right? And we want to see that. We want it written down. We want a clear picture of what that might look like. But oftentimes we don't see like God's hand.
Yeah,
like,
it usually doesn't work like that.
Yeah, usually it feels like we're alone a little bit. But then when you look back, it's like
He's been there the whole time.
Yeah, that's great, man. So you mentioned, like in the beginning, that you had that music teacher who like poured just a lot into you and just invested a lot of time into you. Do you see like bits of that remaining, like in how you interact with like the college students or other people, like volunteers in the band?
Yeah, 100%.
How would you say that that's affected kind of your current role?
I think that something that people don't often think about as a worship pastor is that second part is that they are a pastor. And a lot of people think that it's just being up on stage and leading the worship and running rehearsals, but it's so much more than that, because I have basically built in small groups every single Wednesday night at rehearsal where, obviously our goal is to run an efficient rehearsal and not keep anyone too long so they can get home to their families, go eat, whatever. But when I have opportunities before or after rehearsal or on Sunday mornings before service starts, I have opportunities to have conversations and to really invest in these people. And one of the things that my choir director did most is that he just hung out with us. Like, it wasn't even that he was, trying to develop us as leaders or anything. He just wanted to, I would consider him just a friend. Like, yes, he was my teacher and I still respected him. But, when we go on our choir trips or when we're having cast parties or whatever for theater and he's there, like, we're just hanging out. And that's what I like to try and do with my team is I just want to hang out with them. And like, I'm not necessarily trying to like pour scripture into them or try and fix all their issues and tell them, this, that, whatever, but I'm just trying to invest in them. And that not only helps me grow their relationship and kind of disciple them, but it also helps my rapport as a leader, that I'm not just a teacher. I'm not just the worship leader. I'm not just the guy running rehearsals, but I'm like, they see me as Keith, and they respect me because they know that I care about them and that I'm not just bringing them in because they play an instrument. It's so much bigger than that. And so that's probably where I see his impact most in my ministry.
Yeah, so he taught you in a way how to pastor.
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
Before you even knew that you were going into
Yeah.
ministry. That's awesome, man. Well, Keith, I know we talked about a bunch of different stuff today. You kind of mentioned like waiting and like being in a waiting space, kind of navigating call, like what that might look like. If you had just like a couple of sentences, a couple of minutes maybe with somebody who is actively like in that season, what would you want to share with them?
Man, I would just say that's hard. It's hard to put it into so many words, but I mean, the biggest thing is just, even when it feels like you're hearing something from God and then all of a sudden he's silent, it's not that he's disappeared. It's that he's working behind the scenes, and you know, it'd be so easy for him to just say, okay, in 2020, like if in 2018 when I had this call to be a worship pastor, if he had just said, okay, I'll give it to you in 2021, I would have just put it in cruise control, you know, similar to in high school when I knew that I wanted to be a choir director. I stopped paying attention to math, science, history, English, because I knew it was coming. And I think that it's so easy that we can still do that. If God were to just say exactly when things are going to happen in our lives, we would just put everything in cruise control. And so I think just sitting in that and knowing that there is perfect timing, and that he's not necessarily testing you, but he's shaping you in your trust in him. And I would just, you know, encourage you to continue developing your relationship with him, even when you might be mad at him. Like I spent a lot of time mad at God, but I still showed up at church. I still got involved in small groups. I still spent my quiet times, and the biggest thing is just praying. You know, prayer is such a powerful thing, and God always answers prayers. Sometimes he just doesn't answer them how you think he would, or in the timing that you think he would.